Hey, it's great to see you today, and it's also great to see me, too. Whether you know it or not, I'm staring into a camera, and right behind that camera is my monitor, which shows a display of me. So it's like I'm lecturing to myself. I don't know if I'm very comfortable with that, but that's all we got, and I have to deal with it. Today is lecture number 10. You're going to be starting school pretty soon, and actually for you, this lecture will take place somewhere around the 28th of September. And today's date, I think it's the 11th of August, but, we're about to start school. So anyway, let's get back to our lecture here. The last time we were together, we were talking about the American Revolution. And in fact, I mentioned to you in the closing parts of the class here, we talked about Bunker Hill, which was actually not fought at Bunker Hill. It was fought on Breed's Hill. Nonetheless, if you go to Boston today and walk the Freedom Trail, you'll go up to Bunker Hill. Be sure and take the elevator up to the pavilion. You have to buy a ticket. I beg your pardon. You have to go across to the Visitor Center and get a ticket. It's free. But anyway, it is declared as a British victory. But as one British officer said, if we keep winning battles such as this, we'll have no army remaining, because it was just devastating to the British. So anyway, let's go back to the documents camera here and let's see where we are. I'm going to pick up now the second phase of the Revolutionary War, and we'll go through the second phase today and the third phase. Second phase, which is sometimes referred to as Mid-Atlantic phase, will last from spring of 1776 to spring of 1778. The British were in their best position to win the war at this time. And how they did not win this war, I just don't know. It was just through errors, blunders, if you will, a little bit of luck in the hands of George Washington, that these Americans were able to pull out success with that. Now, if you remember the last time we were together, we talked about General Thomas Gage, 56 years of age, and Thomas Gage was replaced, and the new commander of the British forces in North America would be that of General William Howe. Got a lot to talk to you about with General Howe, if I can work it into my busy lecture today here. So anyway, and I want to point out something else here, and I just wrote this in as a little subnote. If you look over on this side here, shortly after the battle, if you will, at Bunker Hill, Breed's Hill, if you want to call it that, we had a raid to take place on Fort Ticonderoga. Fort Ticonderoga was a British fort, and this raid took place. It was led by the Green Mountain Boys under Ethan Allen. This is out of Vermont, and they attacked Fort Ticonderoga, and they were able to secure 59 pieces of artillery, 59 cannons. You got to remember, in the Continental Army, they have no cannons whatsoever. There's no artillery. And you might be able to get a little bit from the French. You might be able to capture some on the battlefield. But this was a wholesale shot in the arm here, where 59 cannons were captured at Fort Ticonderoga. They were placed under the direction of Henry Knox. Henry Knox, who would later be Secretary of War under George Washington. And if you notice a name there, Henry Knox here, some of you may be able to relate to this. Fort Knox, Kentucky, Knoxville, Tennessee. Anyway, all bear the name there based on Henry Knox. Now, let me show you another map here before we go any further. And I just scribbled this map out a little bit earlier to try to help you out in understanding this. Now, if you remember on Evacuation Day that took place in March 17th, 1776, the British left Boston. And they went to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I told you at that time, I said they will be back. And sure enough, they're going to come back under General Howe. Here we see them returning here, only they're not going back to Boston. Where they're going to go is a place which is in New York, which is called Staten Island. And so they have 32,000 troops there at Staten Island. At this time, George Washington had 19,000 poorly trained, poorly equipped troops. He had them spread out in several different places here. And at this time, actually, General Howe offered George Washington a royal pardon and just give up, everybody go home, and all feelings will be mended with that. And for George Washington, however, he took his army, he refused that offer, by the way, by General Howe, and he took his army, which was 19,000 poorly trained, ill-equipped, and he positioned some of them over here at a place which is called Brooklyn. Now, if you notice here, I abbreviated it like Brooklyn Heights, and part of his army was here. He took part of his army and put his army over here on Manhattan Island. Now, I don't know. You just have to kind of think about this a little bit. George Washington's army is greatly, greatly outnumbered, and he took his army, a portion of it, and put it over here on Long Island. This is on an island. I don't know if that's the smartest thing to do, because you can be trapped. particularly if you have a force that's 2 to 3 times that size. And I'm not sure exactly how many George Washington had, but let's say it's probably 9,000 something. Is that? So anyway, so when the British left Staten Island, came over to Long Island, unloaded their troops here at Gray's Inn Bay, and clashed with George Washington at Brooklyn Heights. And I'm embarrassed to tell you, we didn't do very well with that, my friends. In fact, George Washington suffered a severe defeat. But the British did not pursue their gains here, and under the cover of darkness, George Washington was able to take his troops, place them in boats, and then ship them back or ferry them back over to Manhattan. Now, that's where the majority of the troops are, but if you take a look at this, is Manhattan Island really a good place to be? Notice here on one side, we have on the western side, we have the Hudson River. We have on this side right here, the East River. So if you're on Manhattan, you're trapped. You're trapped. And actually what the British attempted to do was take several of their ships loaded with soldiers and move them up the Hudson River, and if they had been successful in doing that, they could have cut George Washington off and actually trapped him here on Manhattan. But as it turned out, the winds were not in their favor, and so the ships were not able to go up the Hudson River. But nonetheless, we're going to see 2 more engagements to take place here, up one of which is up here on Manhattan. And let me go back to my outline here. And we had, first of all, the Brooklyn Heights battle, and that was a victory for the British. Harlem Heights, of course, was a victory for the British. And for the Americans under George Washington, they moved north and went up to an area which is called White Plains, and once again they clashed with the British, and they were unsuccessful with that. Now, if you look at your textbook map, and this is a map which is on page 139, let me find this here. I'm going to darken this for you good folks. And if we look on the map here, you can see those engagements there that I was telling you about took place right here. Now, the way you want to interpret this, use the key here. If we have a little orange bomb burst there, that indicates that it's British victory. The blue here indicates a Patriot victory, an American victory. And even though it shows you here that Harlem Heights was a British victory, was a American victory, it was not. It was a British victory. All right, now with that, George Washington will take his army, and he will move to the north out of here and move his army from White Plains and move them up in this direction right through here. All right, I want to go back to another map, and let's see what we have here. And let's go back to my map that is up behind me, try to get our contrast set once again. And let's see if I can get this positioned properly here. And what George Washington is going to do, and I'm going to have to look at the map here, so I'll try to show it like this. George Washington moved his army up the Hudson River and was able to get away from the British and came across the Hudson in this fashion and moved down here to where the Delaware River is. Now, George Washington's army is located over in Pennsylvania, where the great number of the British soldiers were located was over here in New Jersey, with the Delaware River separating them. Now, traditionally, what happens during the winter months, the armies go into winter encampments. But George Washington did not do this. In fact, George Washington devised a plan, and this was something that really George Washington and the Patriots needed very, very much. As you watch your video clip included with this lecture today, you'll find that after those defeats that took place over in New York, George Washington's army just melted away. And he just had very few effectives with this, and he really needed a shot in the arm. So what George Washington decided to do, and this was on Christmas night in 1776, was to conduct a surprise raid across the Delaware River and raid against the British and try to catch the British unaware. And Washington was able to secure some of these longboats and use these longboats to transport his army across the across the Delaware River. So here we go, Delaware River here, and what he was planning to do was to assault the British position here, which was located at nearby Trenton. All right, now I want to share some photographs with you here, and I got several things to show you. You probably have seen this likeness before. Let me get a little contrast with that. You probably have seen this likeness of Washington crossing the Delaware, Christmas night, 1776, very foolishly standing in the front of the boat, into the bow of the boat here. Notice how the artist here also is quite cleverly, if I can find it here, quite cleverly painted in James Monroe. James Monroe was painted into this portrait here. And Washington's men, of course, poling, rowing the boats across the Delaware, and it looks good, and I like this. It makes us proud to be Americans to see something like this. All right, now let me show you what it actually looks like in real life. And this was a photograph. I took this photograph a number of years ago. This photograph was taken from the Pennsylvania side, and on the opposite side of the Delaware, you're seeing the New Jersey side there. I actually pulled off my shoes and socks, and I had short pants on at that time, and walked halfway out into the Delaware here. For George Washington's men, they actually could have just waded across. He would have gotten frozen feet, but you could have done that there. When I took this photograph, there were a number of people that were swimming out there in the middle of the Delaware River, so that kind of takes away, a little bit of the portrait that I showed you a few minutes ago. Every year we have reenactors that will go out on Christmas and actually reenact the crossing of the Delaware. Here's something else here. If you go to the park, in this park, which is on the Pennsylvania side, it's known as Washington Crossing, and that's actually where the crossing took place. Kind of interesting place to visit. And sure enough, when George Washington's men were successful in crossing the Delaware, they turned south, were caught in a blinding, driving blizzard. It was a snowstorm, which actually worked in their advantage because the British, and quite truthfully, it was the German Hessians that were defending there in Trenton, just felt like that there's no way that anybody could be out in the snow such as this. And so they didn't post sentries. And George Washington's army was able to score victory at Trenton. This was something we really, really needed desperately. And he followed this by turning to the north into New Jersey, and traveled about 15-20 miles and went up to Princeton, and by golly, they got another victory right there. Just a real shot in the arm. Enlistments for George Washington's army skyrocketed after those two victories. To show you how insignificant this was as far as a military victory, it was a psychological victory, but the British came back within the next couple of weeks and regained control of Trenton and regained control of Princeton too. Alrighty, so anyway, let's move on into a little bit further into our lecture here. And let's see what else the British are going to come up with. And I've got a couple of names down here. General Johnny Burgoyne. And let me get myself organized here for a second here. And I want to tell you what the British did next. They came up with a interesting plan. Let's go back to me, and I want to look on the map behind us here. And I'm going to have to turn around and use the map. And the British came up in this phase, in this second phase, with a magnificent plan. And why it did not work, I just really don't know. Actually, I can tell you the reason that it did not work. But what the British were going to do, under General Howe now, William Howe, they were going to divide their forces. Under General Howe himself, they were going to send a large force up the Hudson River in this direction, just like this. And then they were going to take another force and bring this force by water and go up the St. Lawrence, bring them up the St. Lawrence such as this. And when they got to the point where the Hudson River, actually it's the northern part of the Hudson River, what they're going to do there is take a large portion of British soldiers here under General Johnny Burgoyne, Gentleman Johnny is what they referred to him as, and send them in this direction here. So if you're using my map here, folks, that means we have British forces under Howe coming this direction, British forces under Burgoyne going in this direction. And you can see what they were planning to do. They were just going to create a pincher's movement and cut off George Washington's army, and then the war would come to a close. And to ensure victory even further, what they decided to do under Burgoyne was to divide his force and send it down or up the St. Lawrence over here to Lake Ontario and send them across in this fashion. So once again, what we have here, British are coming in this direction, British are coming in this direction, British are coming in this direction, and by all rights, it should have been a clear British victory. War would have been over. But things began to come apart with that, and I really do not know why. For one thing, with General Howe broke off his part of the engagement, and General Howe took his army and sent them by boat and went down here into the Delaware Bay area and actually brought his army up and took Philadelphia. And that's crazy for them. Well, you have to understand the personality of General Howe. Number one, he was an alcoholic. Number two, he liked the ladies. Going up here in the Hudson River Valley, I don't think you'll find a whole lot of fun activities up there. If you can take your army down to Philadelphia, you probably can. Now, I don't know that. I haven't seen that in writing, but that's my speculation. Now, the other part to this was that under Barry St. Leger that was moving in this direction here was defeated. And they were defeated up in this area. So that meant that this prong is out, this prong is out, and the only thing that remains here is that with Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne going down the Hudson River. And for Johnny Burgoyne, he made great gains with this. They ended up retaking Fort Ticonderoga. Things were working very well, made their way all the way down to Albany, which is located right here. And I guess that's when Johnny Burgoyne realized, that maybe I've extended myself too much. And he turned back and he started back up the Hudson River. And when he did so, he encountered the Patriots, the Americans. And these Americans were under General Philip Schuyler, who was later replaced by Horatio Gates here. And it ended up that Burgoyne actually got himself surrounded by the Americans there. And two engagements took place there, two separate battles. We give them the title. It all falls under the heading, the Battle of Saratoga. All right, so let's see if I can find some things here about the Battle of Saratoga. And I'm going to show this to you here. Let's see here. And if you get a chance to travel up in that area here, which is north of Albany, be sure and take in the battlefields here at Saratoga. You can see an artist rendering here showing the surrender here. The British general that you're seeing there is Johnny Burgoyne, Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne. And I'm going to turn this to the opposite side here. And you can actually take the time to take the auto tour and drive, I don't know, it's probably a 7, 8, 10 mile auto tour that will take you right there throughout the battlefield here at Saratoga. And if you look carefully in the background, you can see the Hudson River there too, because it's right on the battlefield. And my friends, most people consider this to be the turning point of the Revolutionary War, this battle at Saratoga. All right, I'm going to show you another article here that deals with this big win at Saratoga. That'd be one of your examination questions, what is what do most historians consider to be the turning point of the Revolutionary War? It's at Saratoga. All right, now another thing that took place here, and I want to introduce you to this. Sorry for reaching out in front of you like that, but I want to go back to my camera here, my documents camera, and let's see if I can get this right. The individual you're looking at here is Benedict Arnold. Most of you probably are familiar with Benedict Arnold. He's considered to be the worst traitor that the United States has ever had, Benedict Arnold. But I'm going to tell you, he was the principal person that led to that Patriot victory, the American victory at Saratoga. He's a very heroic individual, always in the thick of the combat. The American people and George Washington referred to him as the American Hannibal. Hannibal was a great Carthaginian general, and this guy, Benedict Arnold, was a very courageous leader here. And I have the greatest admiration for him here, although he lost the cause and he was a turncoat to the country. Now, for Benedict Arnold, I want you to pay attention to me. For Benedict Arnold, he was seriously injured at this battle at Saratoga. And if you go to the Battle of Saratoga, Benedict Arnold was shot through the leg here, and it actually just crushed the bones that were down in the leg, and it was a miracle that he actually survived. And when he finally recovered, one leg was like 2 inches shorter than the other leg, so it forced him into an embarrassing hobble, an embarrassing walk. So it seriously impacted upon the future events in his life. Benedict Arnold would later marry a loyalist female. In other words, she was a lady that was still loyal to the British crown. She was quite high maintenance. She had expensive taste with that. And Benedict Arnold was struggling financially to try to give her what she actually needed with that too. Plus, in combination with his disability, and she was quite attractive too, and so he was always trying to impress her. I'm going to come back to that story in just a little bit here. So anyway, that's the story there at Saratoga, and the story also behind that of Benedict Arnold. Now, for the Americans, we're going to greatly benefit from this. That victory at Saratoga. We had been looking desperately for France to give us diplomatic recognition, and France just didn't do so. Even though we used the efforts of Benjamin Franklin as a lobbyist or a person that went to France. He wore this beaver skin cap there, charmed all the women, quite a ladies' man himself, Benjamin Franklin. But he was unsuccessful in getting French support. But once we got that victory at Saratoga, France now gave the United States diplomatic recognition, and they sided with the United States. In addition with that, Spain and Netherlands also sided with France and the United States. So 6 months earlier, you had Great Britain against the United States, and now we have Great Britain against France, United States, Spain, Netherlands. They've got a mess on their hands too. So anyway, the Saratoga was indeed a great victory. All right, now another thing we have here, for the Americans, we did not have a Navy. Now we began constructing a Navy. We called it the Continental Navy. Continental Navy. We actually did very, very well with that. I want to introduce you to a person here by the name of John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones, considered to be the father of the American Navy. That'd be one of your examination questions here. John Paul Jones, great American. I've written his name out here. He was commander of a ship, an American ship, which was called the Bonhomme Richard, and he defeated, and this is a wonderful story if you want to read on your own about this, and I can read about this event, every day. And he defeated this British ship, which was much larger, about double the size of the Bonhomme Richard, and he defeated this British ship, the Serapis. It's a great, great story. All right, so anyway, so John Paul Jones is considered to be the father of the United States Navy. Well, the story doesn't quite end there. All right, I want to show an article to you here, and I'm going to go back to me here. And here we have John Paul Jones. All right, good article here showing you a likeness of John Paul Jones. If you were in my classroom, if I can get this right, if you were in my classroom, you could read through this article. And after the war was over, John Paul Jones went to France, and he spent the rest of his life in France, and that's where he was buried. He was buried at that time. And so anyway, during the time of Theodore Roosevelt's tenure in office, Teddy Roosevelt made a decision we needed to recover the remains of John Paul Jones. So he sent a group, an envoy, to Paris and to go to the cemetery where John Paul Jones was buried and exhume the body, bring it back. But when they arrived in Paris, they found that the cemetery had been covered over with buildings. So there were buildings and residential areas that were all over the cemetery. But they had a record of where all the graves were. So they had a pretty good idea of where John Paul Jones was buried, other than he was now under all these businesses and homes. And so what they decided to do was to go down into the basement of one of the buildings there, follow along with me on this, and actually tunnel across, 6 feet under, and tunnel across like a mine shaft. And I can only imagine all the graves that they were going through over and over and over until they finally felt like that they found the vault of John Paul Jones. And it was a heavy lead vault, and they brought it up to the surface and opened it up, and sure enough, they said, there's John Paul Jones that's on the inside. And anyway, they brought the remains of John Paul Jones back to our country here. They had a ceremony to commemorate the death and the burial, reinterment of John Paul Jones. And I want to show you something here. And let me go back to my camera here. Oops, I'm sorry. And I want to show you something here in this article that gives you a likeness of John Paul Jones. Take a close look at John Paul Jones and see what he actually looked like here, the father of the American Navy. Let me thumb through a couple of more pages here. And for the guys that went over, they had a likeness here of John Paul Jones, and that likeness, which is here. And so the corpse that they actually removed from the vault is on this side here. So you can take a close look and draw your own conclusion on this. Do you think this is John Paul Jones, or do you think this is Pierre, some Frenchman that was exhumed from that French cemetery in Paris? I don't know. You'll have to take your own guess on that. And I want to share something else with you here. So we'll go back to I'll just do it like this. And we'll have to having to flip this over. Where John Paul Jones was laid to rest was in the United States Naval Academy, which is located at Annapolis. Today, if you visit there, the United States Naval Academy is a naval active installation where we train young ensigns for the Navy. And if you go into the Midshipman's Chapel there, down in the basement area of the Midshipman's Chapel, you can actually go into this room here that's dedicated to John Paul Jones. And in the vault here that's in the center of the room, very solemn too, but in the vault that's present there, that supposedly is the remains of John Paul Jones, or perhaps Pierre. I just don't know. All right, so anyway, that's kind of interesting. Let's see here. I want to tell you another story here. And let's say if I can do it like this. In 1776, and use your imagination on this, but in 1776, the British attempted to take Charleston, South Carolina. And there's a fort that guards the entrance into the bay at Charleston, South Carolina. It was called Fort Sullivan at that time. Today it is recognized as Fort Moultrie. Later in the course you'll hear me mention that again. And so for the British to enter into the Charleston harbor, they had to pass by Fort Moultrie, or Fort Sullivan as it was known then. And so gunfiring was taking place. Cannons were being fired at the ships, at the British ships, and the British were returning the fire. And one of the British cannon shots actually went into the fort itself, and the flag of the 2nd South Carolina was the flagstaff was severed, and so the flag unfurled, and it actually went to the outside the parapet and down into the sand below. Well, a young patriot by the name of Sergeant William Jasper, he couldn't even read and write, and Sergeant William Jasper leaped over the parapet wall and retrieved the flag of the 2nd South Carolina Regiment and brought it back into the fort and mounted that flag on a sponge staff. A sponge staff is what you swab out an artillery barrel with, and he remounted that flag on the parapet wall. Well, Sergeant William Jasper became an immediate war hero because of his heroism. And after the war, we'll find that many cities throughout the South will be named for Sergeant William Jasper. We had a Jasper, North Carolina, a Jasper, Tennessee, a Jasper, Georgia, and a Jasper, Alabama. And our city, Jasper, Alabama, is named after this Sergeant William Jasper. And one of the things I want you to do, when you're downtown Jasper, go to 5th Avenue and 19th Street, and on the side of a building there, which is called the Roland Suites, you'll find a mural painted there. It's right next to Young Jewelry, right across from the City Hall. And you'll find a mural painted there of Sergeant William Jasper. And I want you to take a look at it there. All right. Now, today, if you go to South Carolina, if you go to Charleston, South Carolina, at Battery Point, you'll find a statue there, which is of Sergeant William Jasper and the 2nd South Carolina Regiment. And it's interesting. Unfortunately for Sergeant William Jasper, later at the Battle of Savannah, he was killed in that battle. And that battle flag of 2nd South Carolina was taken as a war trophy, and it was brought back to England. And I want to share it with you, see if you can recognize, if you can see what this is. This is a photograph showing you the actual flag of the 2nd South Carolina that Sergeant William Jasper retrieved at Fort Sullivan here, which was captured there. This photograph was given to me. The flag was maintained as a war trophy in the Green Jackets Brigade Military Museum in England, and it was later purchased by a man from the United States from, if I remember right, I think it's Charleston, South Carolina, and today that flag is in a private collection here. All right, so let's move on into the third phase of the Revolutionary War. And this phase is the third phase, or often called the southern phase. Let me go back to my camera here so that you can get the dates and write those dates down there. 1777, 1778, and the British decided to take the campaign to the south because they felt like that's where their strongest support was. That's where the large loyalist support was. It turned out to be a dismal failure with that. It was during this time, back in the north here, and I'll come back to southern phase, that the Battle of Monmouth took place, where General Henry Clinton clashed with George Washington's forces, and most historians will tell you that it was a British victory with that. It was also during this time that Benedict Arnold made a decision that he was going to betray his country. And so he worked out a plan with a Major John Andre, in which Benedict Arnold would give away the inside secrets to the structure of the Patriot Citadel, so to speak, at West Point. And in return for that, he would give that, the British would give him, I believe it was 20,000 pieces of silver. Today, if you go to West Point, you can see the home of Benedict Arnold, which is right across the river, the Hudson River, from where West Point is to this very day. And that's kind of interesting. Unfortunately for Major Andre, he was caught with military secrets that came from Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold knew that the game was up, so Benedict Arnold made his escape over to the British side here. You can't help but to not convince me that Benedict Arnold was in desperate need of money to support the expensive taste of his wife. Major Andre, on the other hand, was taken into custody by the Patriots there, and of course, being a spy, being in civilian clothes, he was sentenced for execution. George Washington made an offer. He said to the British, "You give me Benedict Arnold and I'll trade Major Andre." And the British refused to do so, so Major Andre was hanged. And that's kind of interesting. If you go to an area in New York, which is a little bit down below Albany, not too far from where Manhattan is, you can actually go to the hanging site there of Major Andre. I've shown you enough photographs today. I didn't need to show you another one. Now, one of the things that's going to change here in the South, in the southern part, we're going to move into guerrilla warfare. Now, this is not conventional type warfare. It's guerrilla warfare. All right, most of you watched the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson. You know what I'm talking about with that. Now, some of the Patriot leaders, guerrilla leaders, Thomas Sumter, Andrew Pickens, Francis Marion, happen to be three of those. And what I want you to do here is take a look at these last names of Sumter and Pickens and Marion. Yeah, you recognize anything common about that? Those are names of counties in Alabama and names of counties and many other southern states here that commemorates these guerrilla leaders in the southern phase. All right, I've already told you about Sergeant William Jasper, so we'll just move on here. Now, the British general that was leading the campaign here was General Charles Cornwallis. Charles Cornwallis, and actually, he's a pretty good British commander, too. All right, now, for Cornwallis, and you can use your textbook here. Let me see if I can find this. If you're following along over on page 141 in your textbook, and let's see if I can do this, get some contrast here, and you can see where these battles took place here. I'm reading upside down, so it's kind of difficult for me here. But Savannah was captured by the British. Charleston was captured by the British under Cornwallis here. We have a battle that took place here at Camden, which was a British victory. If we move up to Kings Mountain, which was an American victory, which is located here, Cowpens, your textbook here indicates that Cowpens has a red star as a British victory. Quite personally, I don't go along with your textbook author on that. I think it was a Patriot victory here. If you look behind me, and you can see this, let's see if I can get this. If you see this painting right here, and that painting, let's see, I'm having some trouble with that. But that painting indicates a painting that took place on the battlefield at Cowpens, not very far from where Clemson is located today. All right, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to kind of have to hurry a little bit here, class. There was another battle that took place up here at Guilford Courthouse. I personally consider that a draw. It's one of the nicer Revolutionary battlefields. Revolutionary battlefields are by and large not well preserved like Civil War battlefields are. But actually, Lord Cornwallis ended up calling in artillery on his own men. And his men were so close with the Americans that he opened up fire on his own men, and the Americans broke off the engagement. So some historians will tell you that that was a British victory. All right, and follow Cornwallis's path as he made his way down into Wilmington, moving in this direction up here, kind of circling around here, and finally ended up down here on a peninsula here, which is located at Yorktown. So I'm going to remove my book here, and let's kind of catch up on the names of some of those engagements there. Kings Mountain, October 1781. Cowpens in January 1781. Guilford Courthouse, there you go. And finally, where Lord Cornwallis was in a location which was called Yorktown. And that's where he was penned in. And he was surrounded by water on James River and Gloucester River on the other side here, and he could not get out. And when George Washington was up in New York and found out that Cornwallis was pinned into position at Yorktown, George Washington sent his army down from New York in a period of about 2 weeks and actually joined the American and the French forces that were down in Yorktown. And now with Lord Cornwallis, he realizes there is no way out with this. Now his escape plan was for the British Navy to bring in a rescue mission and actually extract Cornwallis's force. And as they were attempting to do so, the British Navy engaged with the French Navy, and the French Navy, crazily enough, won a magnificent victory over the British Navy at the Battle of the Capes. So that meant that there was no one coming to Cornwallis's rescue. And sure enough, here on the same date, the 17th of October, only 4 years later from Saratoga, in 1781, the 17th of October, Lord Cornwallis surrendered to George Washington. And let me see if I can find I'll just hold it up right here and let you see this. And if you go to this battlefield, it took place at Yorktown, and it's kind of neat because you can do Jamestown and Yorktown and Williamsburg all in the same setting with that. You can go up to a place which is known as Surrender Field, and this is where the British Army, not with Cornwallis refused to go out and surrender. He sent his second in command and went out on this field and actually surrendered to the Americans. It's called Victory Field. And they stacked their arms there, and they were playing the music here. The world turned upside down. All right, now that took place in 1781. That will be the last significant fighting of the Revolutionary War. We will not get a peace settlement to take place for another 2 years. Let's see if I wrote this out for you here. So we'll go back to the notes here. And on September the 3rd in 1783, dates are not important here, the Treaty of Paris was signed. And let's see, I did not write down the signatories that were a part of this, so we won't worry about that. So the Treaty of Paris, and I need you to recognize this. All righty here. So anyway here, and I guess that'll do it for today here, folks. I've talked to you enough here, and we've gone about 37 minutes here, and I'm at a good break point, so we'll pick this up again when we come in for our next time. Don't forget, we have a lot of material here. You have your little quiz to take here. You've got some videos to view here, so stay on top of this now. All right, thank you very much for your attention.